Every year, without fail, there are certain true crime cases that captivate the world, from infamous cases to the murky depths of unsolved mysteries where people seemingly vanish into the unknown. 2023 was no different. Join me as I revisit some of the most gripping and perplexing cases that I covered over the past year, where most of which are still unsolved. Let's discuss the darkest stories that sent shockwaves over the entire nation in 2023. It's no secret that women working alone fall prey to some sadistic individuals. Watch this as a barista working alone in Auburn, Washington is almost abducted by a man in her drive-thru. Luckily, she managed to escape the zip ties around her wrist, and he was eventually caught. But after just a short stay in jail, he's now back on the streets. After disappearing during a solo cross-country road trip and a few odd encounters along the way, it's left many wondering what truly happened to Chelsea Grimm, who was last seen in Williams, Arizona. There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Arizona, and we should talk about it. This is Chelsea Grimm. She went missing during a cross-country road trip from San Diego to Connecticut where she was traveling for a wedding. The timeline of events leading up to her disappearance is bizarre, and it's what makes this case so strange. On September 24th, Chelsea left her home in San Diego to head out for the wedding in Connecticut. She was traveling alone, but she did have her pet bearded dragon with her. On September 27th, just 3 days into the trip, she met up with a friend in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was at this point that she called her parents and said that the drive was actually taking longer than she thought, so she was just going to skip the wedding, maybe do a little bit of camping, and then head back home to San Diego. This was the last time that her parents heard from her, but this is where it gets confusing. Chelsea was actually spotted at a hotel in Seligman, Arizona that day after the phone call with her parents. According to a witness, she seemed disoriented and was trying to use euros instead of US currency. A day later, police responded to a report of a woman who was acting suspicious, and upon investigating, the officer found Chelsea in her car at a cemetery in Williams, Arizona. She was crying and she told him that she was working on a photography project about missing soldiers. She also told the officer that she was planning to camp in her car that night. So after he deemed her to be okay, he suggested that she go to a Love's truck stop to sleep in her car overnight. At this point, it's not known if she actually did that or not. On September 30th, a woodcutter reportedly saw Chelsea camping in her car near Ash Fork, Arizona, but she apparently seemed okay, so no call was made. By October 4th, Chelsea's parents officially reported her missing after not hearing from her. And just 1 day later, hunters found her white 2019 Ford Escape abandoned in the middle of a dirt road near Ash Fork. Both of the tires on the right side of the car were flat, and all of her personal belongings, including her pet bearded dragon, were missing from the car. The vehicle was found to be locked, and it appears that there were no obvious signs of a struggle. But it's now been a month since Chelsea was last seen or heard from. Her family has since hired a private investigator to find out what exactly happened to her. With the car being abandoned on a dirt road with 2 flat tires, and the fact that she was a woman traveling alone is really concerning. These are some photos of what she was last wearing, including a photo of her bearded dragon and a mask that she normally wears. Police across multiple states are now looking for Chelsea, and they're asking anyone with information to call the sheriff's office at 928-774-4523. If you're just now joining, I'm revisiting some of the most gripping true crime cases that I covered over the past year. If you want the full video, you can find that over on my YouTube channel. Continue watching for more mysterious cases, and don't forget to follow me for the most up-to-date coverage on new stories. The place where you should be the safest is in your parents' presence, but sadly that was not the case for 12-year-old Melina Cuevas, who disappeared after getting off her school bus. Why did it take nearly 3 weeks to report this little girl missing? 11-year-old Melina Cuevas was last seen at 4:59 p.m. on security footage getting off of her school bus outside of her home in Cornelius, North Carolina. She hasn't been seen or heard from since. Melina lives with her mom, 37-year-old Diana, and her stepdad, 60-year-old Christopher Palmeter. She wasn't reported missing until December 15th, nearly 3 weeks after she was last seen, and the details surrounding that are incredibly infuriating. A school resource officer at Bailey Middle School, where Melina attended, visited the family home on December 12th, concerned about her whereabouts after she failed to show up to school. According to them, no one answered, so they left a truancy packet on the doorstep. 2 days later, a school counselor called Diana wanting to set up a meeting about Madalina's attendance. Diana told them that she would be bringing Madalina to school the next day. However, that never happened. Finally, on December 15th, Diana went to the school and told the resource officer that she actually didn't know where Madalina was and hadn't seen her since November 22nd. Prior to this, she had not once reported this to the police. A massive search began that day, but Madalina is still missing. Her parents, Diana and Christopher, were arrested on the 17th of December and charged with failure to report the disappearance of a child to law enforcement. The two of them remain in jail as the investigation continues. When asked why she waited so long to report her daughter missing, Diana stated she felt it would cause conflict between her and Madalina's stepdad. She also said that she believed he put the family in danger. Diana has since changed her story of when she last saw Madalina a few times, but she is currently sticking with November 23rd. She told authorities that she and Christopher fought that night. Christopher told authorities that he left town to Michigan on the evening of November 23rd to pick up items and, at that point, hadn't seen Madalina for a week prior. However, Diana disagreed and told authorities that Christopher actually left for Michigan on the 24th, and that when she went to Madalina's room at 11:30 that morning, she wasn't there. Christopher returned home on November 26th, and from that day forward, they both stated that they didn't know where Madalina was at, but that they accused each other of hiding her. Even so, they failed to report her missing at that time. Police fully believe that Madalina's parents are not telling them everything they know. They've also been focused on and investigating a fire pit in the family's backyard. If you have any information on the disappearance of Madalina Kojokari, please contact the Cornelius Police Department at 704-892-7773. After Ingrid Lane vanishes from an overnight meditation retreat, her mysterious disappearance lingers over the rugged Jemez Mountains and leaves a trail of questions in its wake. There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now out of New Mexico, and we should talk about it. This is Ingrid Lane. She went missing on October 15th of this year after leaving the Bodhi Manda Zen Center in the Jemez Mountains. She went on an overnight meditation retreat to clear her head and focus on her mental health, and it's something that she had done multiple times in the past, except this time she never returned home. Ingrid was last seen that day on Forest Road 144 by two hunters after her 2019 Subaru Impreza hatchback got a flat tire. The two hunters aired up the tire for her and asked if she wanted to ride to the nearest town as it was a really remote area, but she declined and said that she wanted to hike to a local mountain peak. This all happened around 2 p.m. Unfortunately, she did not specify which mountain peak, and this would be the last interaction that she would have with anyone. 3 days later, her car was found abandoned on that same road, and the rear window was smashed. And this is where things start to get strange. Inside the car was a burner phone that was still in its package, untouched and not activated. Her family, but more specifically her husband, are really confused on why that would be in her car. All of her accounts, including her cell phone, have not been active since the 15th. A massive search was launched for Ingrid, which consisted of K9 units, drones, ATVs, and helicopters, but absolutely nothing has been found. The Sandoval Sheriff's Office brought in tracking dogs, which tracked Ingrid's scent in the area south and east of her vehicle on Forest Road 144, which is between Jemez Springs and Los Alamos, but it quickly died off within 2 miles of the vehicle. Authorities speculate she may have gotten a ride further into the mountains because of how suddenly her scent disappeared, and how the canines couldn't pinpoint a way she would have gone out. Most of Ingrid's family live in Oregon. They've spent countless hours traveling to New Mexico to search for her, but the terrain has made it really difficult. The area where she went missing is high elevation, densely forested, very remote, and way beyond cell phone range. According to a local sheriff, it's a really easy place to get lost in. Despite that, it's a really popular place in the hunting community and for avid hikers just like Ingrid, who had been to the area multiple times. Like I mentioned earlier, Ingrid had stayed at the Bodhi Manda Zen Center many times in her life. The Zen Center reportedly confirmed that Ingrid had been there that day around 9 a.m., and while she was there, she meditated with the group but left shortly after. The director of the retreat said that she seemed to be in a good frame of mind and that nothing was amiss. But Ingrid completely vanished, and it's now been 6 weeks with no sign of her. At this point, authorities do not suspect foul play despite the odd circumstances. Her family stated that she struggles with sleep and mental health, but they don't believe that she went into the mountains not planning to come back for many reasons. One reason being is that she was really really happy before this happened, planning on going back to work the next week, making plans, and just overall excited about her future. She and her husband are described as having a once-in-a-lifetime type of love, and they say that it would be so out of character for her to just leave without saying anything. Ingrid also has a rare lung problem that worsens when it's cold out, so it would be extremely unlikely that she would intentionally hike far away from her car that day. She also just wasn't packed to camp or be gone for an extended period of time. Her family has searched Tacoma, which is reportedly the highest point in the area, as well as San Antonio Mountain, but because it's now winter, the dangerous terrain has made it really difficult to continue searching by foot. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio created for the family so that they can continue funding the search for Ingrid. They plan to conduct as many helicopter searches as they can with the funds. If you're local to New Mexico, please share this any way that you can. Right now, having her face out there is so important. Ingrid is described as 5'5", 120 pounds, and has brown hair and hazel eyes. If you have any information at all, please call the Sandoval Sheriff's Office at 505-867-7526. After disappearing from a small Illinois town in 2017, a little girl would be found alive 6 years later, all thanks to an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. This little girl went missing in 2017, but she was just found alive after being recognized from a recent Unsolved Mysteries episode on Netflix. Kayla Unban was 9 years old when she was reportedly abducted by her mom in Wheaton, Illinois. She was last seen on the 4th of July on a camping trip while spending the holiday with her mom, who at the time only had certain visitation rights. Kayla's mom and dad separated just a few weeks after she was born, but what ensued was a lengthy and nasty custody battle. But when July 5th, 2017 came and Heather failed to return home with their daughter, Kayla was reported missing and a warrant was issued for Heather's arrest. But the two seemingly vanished into thin air. Over the years, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children kept releasing age-enhanced photos of Kayla in hopes of finding her. And just last year, her case was also featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix about parents who've abducted their kids. But just last weekend, a store owner in Asheville, North Carolina recognized Kayla after having watched her episode on Netflix and called the police. And 6 years after her disappearance, Kayla has officially been located safe. Her mom, Heather, has been arrested and was charged with 1 count of child abduction. She's being held on a $250,000 bond while awaiting extradition to Illinois. On Kayla's 15th birthday earlier this year, her dad posted this tribute on the Facebook page dedicated to finding her, called Bring Kayla Home. After a woman goes missing from her own home, DNA evidence is found proving that she was likely murdered. Although her body was never found, her case was upgraded to a murder investigation, and at the root of it all is her husband. If your wife is missing, why would you Google how to dispose of a woman's body? 39-year-old Anna Walsh was last seen leaving her Cohasset, Massachusetts home around 4 a.m. on New Year's Day. There hasn't been any cell phone or bank activity since that day, and she hasn't been seen or heard from again. Anna shares the home with her husband Brian and their 3 kids. Just 1 day after she disappeared, Brian was caught on security footage at Home Depot buying $450 worth of cleaning supplies, maps, and a tarp. Anna wasn't reported missing until January 4th from both her husband and her employer after she failed to show up to work. When investigators searched the home, they found a broken knife and blood in the Walsh's basement. During the investigation, authorities were sent to a waste facility in Peabody, which is about an hour away from the family home. During their search, they found a hacksaw, a hatchet, and a bloody rug. Also found was a garbage bag containing blood as well as human tissue, all believed to be connected to Anna's disappearance. After looking into Brian, police discovered that after Anna went missing, he Googled, quote, how to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body, end quote. Just a few days ago, Brian was arrested and charged with misleading the police investigation into the disappearance of his wife, and he has since pleaded not guilty. He's currently being held on a $500,000 bail. This is not the first time that Brian has had run-ins with the law. In 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to charges related to an attempt to scam someone in LA using fake Andy Warhol paintings. Because of that, Brian was placed on home confinement, which was still taking place up until his recent arrest. Adding to that, he was also at the center of an ongoing dispute over his late father's will. His family members accused him of destroying the document and wrongly taking over his father's estate. According to Anna's mom, Anna had texted her on Christmas and said, quote, please mama, come tomorrow, end quote. Anna's mom said that she and Brian loved each other, but this seemed to allude to some problems, although Anna didn't mention exactly why she wanted her mom to come so urgently. According to her, Anna also recently mentioned her frustration with Brian's home confinement. This forced her to temporarily live alone in a Washington, D.C. home that Anna also owned. Anna worked a lot in Washington, D.C. and would often visit the home. Anna reportedly tried calling her mom around midnight on the night she went missing, as well as once more an hour later, but her mom was sleeping and missed the call. Right after, she also tried calling her sister and a friend, but they also missed the call. A friend of the Walshes has come forward and stated that he spent New Year's Eve with a couple and has said that there was no indication of any tragedy or trouble. But it's now been 10 days since Anna was last seen. This is an ongoing investigation, so hopefully more answers will come to light soon. In the small town of Enoch, Utah, a quiet community would be rattled as a family of 8 is found dead in their home. At the center of it all is the father, who, even though was a recognized member of the church, had a dark history of abuse that would prove to be fatal. Yesterday, 8 family members were found shot to death inside of a home in the small town of Enoch, Utah. They were all members of the same family, and police have determined that it was a murder-suicide. According to authorities, the bodies of 5 children and 3 adults were found inside the home suffering from gunshot wounds after police conducted a welfare check. Police determined that the father, 42-year-old Michael Heith, shot his 5 children, his wife, his mother-in-law, and then himself. According to authorities, just 2 weeks ago on December 21st, Michael's wife filed for divorce, and ever since his mother-in-law had been supporting her. The children were ages 17 to 4 years old. Enoch, Utah is about 245 miles from Salt Lake City and is a really tight-knit community. City councilmen and other residents of the community are in complete shock and have described the Heights as a wonderful family who were very well respected and well known in the area. After a baby is kidnapped by a mysterious woman posing as a babysitter in 1971, her case would go cold. That is, until a DNA test was taken 51 years later that would reunite her with her true family. This is Melissa Highsmith. In 1971, when she was just 21 months old, she was kidnapped by her babysitter, and for 51 years, her disappearance would go unsolved. But 2 months ago, she was found alive and was reunited with her family. In the summer of 1971, baby Melissa's parents had newly separated. And on the verge of losing her job, Melissa's mom, Atla, posted an ad in the local Fort Worth newspaper looking for a babysitter. A woman who went by the name Ruth Johnson responded to the ad and asked to meet Atla at the restaurant where she was working, but she never showed. Not long after, Ruth called Atla and told her that she had a big backyard where she would also watch other children, and she asked if it would be okay to watch baby Melissa there. And since Atla was trying not to lose her job, she agreed. So one day when she was at work, Ruth went to Atla's apartment and picked up baby Melissa from her roommate. The roommate said the woman seemed nice and was dressed to impress, with nice sunglasses, wearing a bonnet, and white gloves. But unfortunately, the woman never came back, and Atla was never able to get a hold of her again. This sparked a massive search for Melissa, but with very little leads to go off of, her case would go cold, and she would be missing for 51 years before her family would have any answers. In early November of last year, there was a possible sighting of the now adult Melissa in North Carolina, which turned out to be false. But this false sighting sparked a fire in Melissa's family to once again begin searching. Melissa's dad, Jeffrey, decided to submit a DNA test through 23andMe, and when the results came back, it shocked him. The results connected Melissa's children with their family, grandkids that they didn't even know they had. By finding a marriage record, Jeffrey was able to locate Melissa's Facebook page. Except the Melissa they knew now went by the name Melanie Walden. They sent her a message explaining the situation, and at first, Melanie didn't believe them. But once the family told her about a very specific birthmark that was on her back, and after seeing almost identical baby photos, she immediately knew. And when she took a DNA test, it proved it. Melanie Walden was baby Melissa, and after 51 years, she was finally reunited with her family. What's incredibly sad is the fact that Melissa was raised in Fort Worth, less than 20 minutes from the family that she was abducted from. Melissa went on to say that she didn't have an easy life growing up, and the woman who raised her was very abusive. So much so that she left home at the age of 15. Melissa stated that once she found out that she had been abducted as a baby, she confronted the woman who raised her, who in turn admitted to knowing that Melissa was kidnapped. No other information about this woman has been publicly released. Melissa is going by her birth name again and has since stated that she wants to redo her wedding so that her dad can now walk her down the aisle. Although this case took place in 2012, when I covered it on TikTok this year, it blew up, leading many to learn of one of the most horrifying serial killers to date. This is the exact moment that 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was abducted from a coffee stand in Alaska. At around 8 p.m. on February 1st, 2012, Samantha was kidnapped from the Common Grounds coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska by serial killer Israel Keys. She had been working alone when security footage showed her being approached by Israel, who walked up to the window, pointed a gun at her, and demanded that she turn off the lights. He then bound her hands together, jumped through the window, stuffed napkins into her mouth, and forced her into his truck before taking her back to his house where he lived with his girlfriend and 10-year-old daughter. Once at home, he tied her up in a shed in his backyard, went inside to make sure his family was asleep, and then went back out to the shed where he sexually assaulted and strangled Samantha to death. Israel then left her body in the shed and proceeded to go on a 2-week-long cruise with his family. Samantha was reported missing the next day, and the FBI quickly got involved, but unfortunately it was too late. When Israel returned home from the cruise, he decided to take a ransom photo of Samantha in order to receive money from her parents. He promised that she'd be unharmed if they sent him money. But in order to provide proof of life, he needed to make it look like she was still alive, so he proceeded to braid her hair and do her makeup, and he even went as far as sewing her eyelids open with fishing line. But in all reality, she had already been deceased for 2 weeks. On February 24th, Israel texted Samantha's boyfriend using her phone and told him to look for a package in a local park, and it was then that the Anchorage police found the ransom photo and the note demanding $30,000. And just wanting their daughter back safely, Samantha's parents paid him the money by depositing it into her bank account that was linked to her debit card, which he had stolen from her. Sadly, Samantha would not be returned to her family, as Israel then dismembered her body and disposed of her remains in Matanuska Lake. Shortly after, he started using her debit card, which alerted authorities right away. He would disguise himself while withdrawing the money, but one ATM security camera caught him driving away in a white Ford Focus, and it was because of this that he would soon be caught. On March 13, 2012, a Texas state trooper located the car in question and started following him until he was speeding, at which point he pulled him over. Inside the car was Israel, and authorities then found Samantha's debit card and cell phone. Once arrested, Israel confessed to Samantha's murder, but he also confessed to much more. He claimed to have started killing people in 1998, and by the time he kidnapped Samantha, he claimed to have also killed 10 other people in multiple states. While incarcerated, Israel took his life by attempted strangulation and using a razor blade. Before he died, he drew 11 skulls in his own blood and wrote, quote, "We are one," end quote. Some people commit such horrific crimes that it's hard to comprehend. This story is so brutal that it makes you question if you can even trust your own family. This is probably one of the worst true crime cases that I've ever heard of. In August of 2019, David Sumney brutally beat his mom to death and then took 277 photos on his cell phone of the gruesome crime scene. The photos included selfies with her body, posing with blood smeared on his face, and even a photo of him giving a thumbs up. After he brutally killed her, he put her body in the bathtub and proceeded to record himself washing off her corpse. When the family couldn't get a hold of 67-year-old Margaret Sumney on August 31st, 2019, they knew something was wrong. After trying for 2 days with no success, they had the police conduct a welfare check at her Pennsylvania home. When authorities couldn't reach Margaret, they forcibly entered the home where they discovered shattered glass everywhere and blood smeared on the walls and furniture. Upon investigating, they then found Margaret's badly beaten body in her bathtub. According to the autopsy report, she died from blunt force trauma to the head, neck, and torso. When interviewed by authorities, David initially stated he had nothing to do with his mom's murder. But when police searched his phone, they found the 277 gruesome photos. Along with that, authorities also found Margaret's jewelry and 3 of her blank checks inside of a hotel room where David had been staying. David was arrested on September 4th, and during his trial, a defense expert stated that at the time of the murder, he had taken a high dosage of Adderall, which caused diminished mental capacity. His lawyer argued that the murder was strictly due to drug and alcohol use. David was initially facing a first-degree murder charge as well as abuse of a corpse, and if he was charged with that, he would have faced life in prison without parole. But unfortunately, he was allowed to enter a guilty plea, which dropped both of those charges, and instead he pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. He was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, but since he's been behind bars since his arrest in 2019, he could potentially be released in just 17 years. And the scary part is that according to prison employees, they consider David a model prisoner who attends Bible studies with other inmates. And this makes the reality of him being released so soon a real possibility. It should be noted, though, that David had been arrested twice in the past for assaulting his mother and once for attacking his now deceased father. Adding to this, he also faces a pending case for allegedly waterboarding and strangling an ex-girlfriend, which also took place the year of the murder. David Sumney is a terrifying man, and the fact that he could ever be released back into society is a terrifying thing. When you hear Ding Dong Ditch, many think back to fun times in your childhood playing a harmless game with your friends. Unfortunately, for these 3 teenagers, it would end in murder. 6 teenage boys played a harmless Ding Dong Ditch prank on this man's home, and just minutes later, 3 of them were dead. On the evening of January 19th, 2020, 6 teenage boys and best friends were having a sleepover and celebrating Jacob Avascu's 16th birthday. Later that night, one of the boys was dared to either jump into a pool or ding-dong ditch somebody's house, and after choosing the latter, they all got into a Prius driven by their 18-year-old friend and picked a random house. The house they chose belonged to 45-year-old Anar Chandra in Corona, California. Once there, one of the teens hopped out, rang the doorbell, mooned the camera, and then got back into the Prius where they quickly drove off. But this harmless prank angered Anar so much that he got into his car and started chasing the teens. He was going 99 miles per hour in a 40-mile-per-hour zone, and when he caught up to the Prius, he intentionally rammed into the back and side of it. This caused it to go off the road, quickly slamming into a tree and utility pole. The crash immediately killed Drake Ruiz, Daniel Hawkins, and Jacob Avascu, all 16 years old. According to Anar, he didn't stop after the crash and proceeded to go home after hitting the kids because he didn't think anyone was hurt. He was arrested at his home later that same night. The driver and 2 other 13-year-olds who were also in the car were injured but survived the crash. During the investigation, Anar said that the prank angered him so much, but also said that he decided to chase after the teens because he was worried for his family's safety after being mooned. It was also revealed that in the 3 hours before the prank, Anar consumed 12 beers and was highly intoxicated. Anar has just been charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder and has since pleaded not guilty. He's due back in court on July 14th and faces life in prison without parole. It's also worth noting that at the time of the killings, Anar was already facing domestic violence and battery charges in an unrelated incident. After disappearing in the vast Oregon wilderness, leaving behind 11 of her show rabbits to perish, questions remain as to what truly happened to Gwen Brunell. There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Oregon, and we should talk about it. This is Gwen Brunell. She went missing during a solo road trip from Boise, Idaho to California. She told family and friends that she was meeting up with a nationally recognized rabbit judge in a small town near Fresno, but she never made it. The timeline of events after she left her home is bizarre, and it's what makes this case so strange. Gwen left her home in Boise on June 26th of this year. The trip seemed really sudden to her family and friends, but she told them that she was planning on meeting up with a rabbit judge in California to show some of her show rabbits. From a very young age, she was an expert on raising and showing purebred rabbits, so much so that she had won awards and was nationally recognized. It was her calling, and she loved her rabbits. So that day, she packed up her 2008 Honda Element with some personal belongings, some clothes for a road trip, and 3 cages filled with 11 of her show rabbits. Also packed up was about a week's worth of food and water for the rabbits. She promised her dad that she would keep in touch, but no one heard from her again after she stepped foot outside of her house, and her cell phone was soon shut off. Gwen was then spotted at a convenience store about 20 miles from her home. But what's strange is that she was caught on CCTV footage wearing different clothes from when she left her house. She left her home in a blue shirt and Nike shoes, but at the store she was wearing a red shirt and knee-high dress boots. What's also weird is that the store was only 20 miles away, yet it took her 3 hours to get there, and no one knows what she was doing in the meantime. Gwen was officially last seen in Jordan Valley, Oregon 1 day later. She had stopped at a Sinclair gas station around noon, got gas, and then went across the street to buy snacks at Mrs. Z's convenience store. There she told the attendant that she was in a hurry, but she then spent the next hour in the parking lot in her car without moving. This concerned the worker, so they went out to make sure that she was okay, but Gwen stated that she was fine. But after this, she disappeared, and it didn't take long for her parents to report her missing. 4 days later, Gwen's car was found abandoned near Sucker Creek Road in Malheur County, just a half-mile from the highway. It was reportedly parked at a pullout that was commonly used by visitors. All 4 windows were partially open, and the keys and the rest of her personal belongings, including her credit cards and driver's license, were still inside. Also inside of the car were all 11 of her rabbits, but sadly at this point, because of the heat, 5 of them had perished. Authorities and dozens of volunteers began searching for Gwen in the area near where her car was found, and even a private search of Sucker Creek was conducted, but nothing would be found for 2 months. On September 10th, Gwen's t-shirt was found tangled up in a barbed wire fence near Dog Creek. Shortly after, Gwen's boots were found roughly 80 yards from where the shirt was found. This was all found less than 2 miles from where her abandoned car was found months earlier. More than 300 miles have been searched using ATVs, dogs, and even by air, but no other trace of Gwen has ever been found. Police say that there is no sign of an abduction and believe that she may have wandered off into the rangeland. But like I mentioned earlier, Gwen absolutely loved her rabbits. It would be incredibly odd for her to leave them in a hot car to perish without willingly coming back. According to her family, Gwen did take medications for certain mental conditions that could make her moody or inattentive. Her mom reached out to the rabbit judge that Gwen was supposed to meet, and according to them, they never heard from Gwen and had no idea that she was even planning to come. They said that they weren't expecting Gwen at all. This is left her family wondering if she was planning on meeting up with someone else and just didn't tell them. Her mom believes that Gwen is still somewhere out there on the rangeland and wonders if she was possibly going through a mental crisis. Regardless, they just want to bring their daughter home. It's now been 5 months with no sign of Gwen, and just like with the Chelsea Grim case, it's really concerning that her car was found abandoned and that she was a woman traveling alone. Gwen is described as being 5'7", roughly 140 pounds, and has brown hair and brown eyes. If you have any information at all, please either contact the Boise Police at 208-377-6790 or the Malheur County Sheriff's Office at 541-473-5125. After being held captive for 1 year, a woman makes a brave escape, which is all caught on security footage, but her kidnapper is not far behind. What you're about to watch is extremely disturbing, so watch at your own risk. That was a woman who earlier this month escaped her kidnapper after being held captive for the last year. As seen in the video, she made her escape to a gas station in Burlington County, New Jersey, and following close behind trying to catch her was her abductor. The woman's identity has been withheld for her safety, but her kidnapper is 57-year-old James Perillo Jr. According to authorities, the woman met James at a gas station in New Mexico in February of last year during a cross-country road trip. James told her that his name was Brett Parker and asked her for a ride to Arizona, in which she agreed. According to her, for the first month they were in a consensual relationship, but it wasn't long after that he began assaulting her. He took away her phone and debit cards and isolated her from her family. He then spent the next year holding the woman captive and traveling with her throughout the country. In the weeks before she escaped, the two had visited a gas station in New Jersey that was close to a room that James had rented out in Bass River Township. And it was there that she noticed that the store had an interior deadbolt. It was at this point that she began plotting her escape. The day she escaped, James had been beating and choking her, and she somehow broke free and made a run for it back to that gas station. It was only 42 degrees out, and she was wearing only a t-shirt and shorts with no shoes. When she got inside of the store, she immediately locked the door, and it's a really good thing she did because James was right behind her. Luckily, he didn't get in though. The woman told the attendant that she had been kidnapped and held captive for the last year and that she needed help. She had deep cuts and marks on her neck. James was caught and arrested that same day, which was February 7th. He's being held at the Burlington County Jail with no bail because, according to authorities, they found evidence online that he may have had other victims in the past. He's been charged with first-degree kidnapping, second-degree strangulation, and aggravated assault, amongst many other charges. If convicted, he faces up to 47 years in prison and a fine of nearly $500,000. It's not totally uncommon to be curious about what drives a person to kill, but what happens if you become too curious? This woman became so obsessed with true crime that she brutally murdered someone just out of curiosity. This story needs a massive trigger warning as this photo is not what it seems. This is Young Yu Young, a 23-year-old woman described as a recluse who lived with her grandfather in South Korea. Young became so obsessed with true crime TV shows and books that she spent months plotting the murder of a stranger. She finally settled on a victim who was 26 years old and whose name has never been publicly released after contacting 54 other women on a tutoring app. She posed as a mother who was looking for someone to teach her daughter English, and she would message each tutor to see if they taught lessons alone and out of their own home. After contacting 54 other women, she finally found her victim, who did in fact live alone and agreed to help her daughter. So she set up a date in May of this year and arrived to the victim's home in Busan, posing as a young student dressed in a school uniform. And when the victim let her in, she proceeded to stab her over 100 times, most of which occurred after the victim was already dead. Young then went to the store to purchase garbage bags and bleach, and then she returned back to the home where she dismembered the victim. She even cut off her fingers in an attempt to delay identification. Young then stuffed the body parts into suitcases, changed into the victim's clothes, and was seen on CCTV going in and out of the victim's home multiple times with the bloodstained suitcase. She then called a taxi who took her to the Nakdong River where she dumped some of the remains in a secluded park. In an attempt to make it look like the woman just disappeared, Young also kept her phone, ID, and wallet, and she thought she committed the perfect crime, but she was very wrong. On top of being caught on CCTV leaving the victim's home, Young was also acting very strange in the taxi drive to the river, and the driver even saw the bloodstained suitcase. So they were the one to actually call police and report what they saw, and upon investigating, police discovered a gruesome scene. Many Many of the woman's body parts were found at the park, but some were also found at Young's home. Authorities also found that her search history consisted of looking up how to kill someone for months leading up to the murder, and she even rented books from the library on how to get rid of a body. Young was soon arrested, but her story changed multiple times. She first told police that she only moved the woman's body after someone else killed her, and then she told them that she actually killed the tutor during an argument. But she ultimately told the police that she murdered the woman out of pure curiosity and just to see what it was like after becoming obsessed with true crime TV shows and books. Young was charged with murder, desecration, and abandonment of a corpse, and prosecutors were originally wanting the death penalty because of how gruesome the crime was. Young pleaded for a more lenient sentence because she said she suffered from hallucinations and other mental health disorders at the time of the murder, but the judge ultimately ruled the murder was very premeditated and carefully planned, and instead she was sentenced to life in prison. In addition to that, she's also ordered to wear a tracking device for 30 years after. This kind of confused me, but from what I can find, those sentenced to life in prison in South Korea become eligible for parole after just 20 years behind bars. So I guess it's a real possibility for Young to be released early. After an app leads a group of teenagers filming a TikTok to discover a suitcase containing human remains, a murder investigation begins, which uncovers a house of horrors near Seattle, Washington. Do you guys remember the Randonautica app and how it led a group of teenagers using it to a suitcase of dismembered human remains? On June 19, 2020, a group of teenagers were using Randonautica, which prompted them to explore a West Seattle beach called Duwamish Head. One of the teens was recording a TikTok video when they stumbled upon a large suitcase that had washed ashore. After opening it with sticks, they found that inside of the suitcase was a garbage bag that had a horrible smell, so they called the police. When police searched the area, they also found a smaller duffel bag, and both bags contained dismembered human remains. After testing, the King County Medical Examiner found that the remains belonged to 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner, a couple who had been dating for 8 years. Authorities concluded that the couple had been beaten before death, and after, Jessica was shot multiple times while Austin was fatally shot once. They were then dismembered, and police believe this happened roughly 10 days earlier on June 9th. During the investigation, authorities found that the couple had been renting a room in a Burien house from 62-year-old Michael Lee Dudley, who had a long history of sexual assault and violent animal cruelty. On the night of the murders, neighbors actually called 911 after hearing gunfire and screaming coming from the home, but when the Burien police responded, nobody answered the door, so they just left. A witness came forward and said that she actually moved into Michael's home on the night of the murders and that Michael actually helped move her things in. But she said that his glasses were broken and that he had scratches all over him. She also said that later that night, she opened the upstairs bedroom door, which is where she was going to be staying, and saw a pile of clothing on the floor with a hand sticking out of it. Michael then reportedly told her that he needed to clean up a mess first and asked if he could take her somewhere else for the night, in which she agreed. But when they were leaving, she saw Michael laying out plastic tarp all over the basement floor. And when she asked him about it, he said, quote, "Let's just put it this way, his gun misfired and mine didn't," end quote. After searching Michael's home and finding bullet holes, blood, and other incriminating evidence, he was arrested. Although he initially denied any involvement in the murders, authorities believe that his motive was over unpaid rent. Michael was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, and I believe sometime this month he will officially be sentenced. After a woman mysteriously disappears from a campsite in Montana, questions remain as to why the only witness took 3 days to report her missing. There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Montana, and we should talk about it. This is Renee Arcand. She went missing during a 5-day camping trip near Glendive last June, and the details surrounding her disappearance are still a mystery. Renee was last seen on June 26th of this year at the Fish Intake Campground, which is a really popular paddle fishing site. At the time of her disappearance, she was traveling from Wisconsin, where she was from, to Oregon, and in that last week of June, she decided to stop and camp for a few days in Montana. In the days prior, Renee was working at the Buffalo Gap Guest Ranch in North Dakota, which is about an hour east of Glendive. There she was working with a man who has not yet been publicly identified, and the two decided to camp together at the Fish Intake Campground, which is along the Yellowstone River. According to the man, on the night of June 26th, he, Renee, and her 2 dogs camped out in her dark blue 2011 Toyota Scion. He states that he went to sleep that night in her car with her 2 dogs, and when he woke up the next morning, Renee was gone. Almost all of her personal belongings were left behind, including the car, obviously, and her 2 dogs. But one material item was missing along with Renee, and that was her iPad. According to the man, he then spent the next few days looking for Renee, and he officially reported her missing 3 days later on June 30th. The Dawson County Sheriff's Office immediately started looking for Renee, and they, along with volunteers and Badlands Search and Rescue, have since searched the Yellowstone River and 20 miles around the area where she went missing. Almost every inch of the campground and surrounding areas have been searched, using boats, drones, cadaver dogs, helicopters, and even using sonar equipment. But absolutely no trace of Renee has been found, and it's like she vanished into thin air. The river was reportedly really high at the time and incredibly muddy and deep, and the current was estimated to be roughly 8 miles an hour. The sheriff has stated that it's really rare that someone goes missing in the Yellowstone River, but it does happen. Although they did state that they usually would have been found by now. No witnesses in the area saw Renee go into the river, although at this point, the police assume she did. It's important to note that on August 13th, just 2 months after Renee went missing, human remains were found in the area, but they have since been ruled out and do not belong to Renee. The man who Renee was camping with has reportedly been cooperating with law enforcement, and he did tell authorities his story of what took place. The DCSO has stated that so far the man's story does check out, and whatever reason he gave for having such a big time gap before reporting her missing makes sense. What's strange though is that one of Renee's beloved dogs, a Chihuahua mix named Bean, is also now missing in a separate but related incident. Apparently after Renee went missing, the man she was traveling with kept her dogs, Bean and Zizzy, but as he was driving back to North Dakota just a day after Renee was reported missing, he reportedly let Bean and Zizzy out to go to the bathroom, where they then both ran away. Zizzy was eventually found 15 miles outside of Glendive, but Bean is still missing. He was last seen near the Montana-North Dakota state line. The police still have Renee's car, and authorities have since tried to ping her iPad that is also still missing, but the location was turned off and it no longer has a connection. Workers at the campsite have confirmed that they did in fact see Renee at the campground the night she went missing, but it's now been 6 months, and Renee is still missing. So far, the police have said that this is not a criminal investigation, but the circumstances surrounding Renee's disappearance remain a mystery. Boaters, fishermen, and hunters in the area are asked to keep their eyes open for any clues. And if you were by chance camping at the Fish Intake Campground the week of June 26th, please try to remember if you might have seen Renee or her car. Renee is described as being 5'5", 150 pounds, and has brown hair and hazel eyes. She also has a tattoo on her wrist that says, "This too will pass." If you have any information at all, please contact the Dawson County Sheriff's Office at 406-377-5291. One of the most perplexing cases to come out of 2023 follows the disappearance of Nancy Ng during a yoga retreat to Guatemala. Nothing about this case makes sense, and her disappearance remains a mystery. There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now that everybody should be talking about. This is Nancy Ng. She went missing during a yoga retreat to Guatemala last month. The details in this case are bizarre because it involves a whole group of people who basically witnessed Nancy go missing, yet most of them refused to talk to authorities. So on October 14th, Nancy left her home in Monterey Park, California to go on a week-long yoga retreat to Lake Atitlan. This would have been her second year in a row doing this, and it was just something that she was really excited about because she loved the area, and it was supposed to be just really relaxing. But just a few days into the trip, the organizer of the retreat called Nancy's family and told them that she disappeared. She was officially reported missing on October 20th, but the few details that we do have are really strange. Nancy was seen for the last time in this video, which was taken on October 19th. She was paddling on a kayak on Lake Atitlan and happily waving to someone off camera. She was with a group of 9 other tourists who traveled to Guatemala for the retreat as well. Nancy was last seen splitting up from the group with another woman to continue kayaking up the lake. According to that woman, the two paddled for roughly another mile before Nancy jumped into the lake and either drowned or disappeared. The woman said she then paddled back to the group, where they then all went back to the hotel where they were all staying and notified management. And when the hotel staff searched for Nancy and couldn't find her, that's when they called the police to report her missing. But this is when things start to get strange. According to the kayak company, who recently made a statement, all 9 of the other tourists in that retreat returned home the day Nancy disappeared. They all reportedly left the lake without saying a word, and they all checked out of the hotel within 12 hours and never paid for the excursion. On top of that, almost all of the witnesses in that retreat group have chosen not to come forward and talk with police. They never gave any witness statements, and they haven't been forthcoming with any information, which has severely hindered the investigation. Guatemalan officials searched the lake and Nancy's hotel hotel room, but they suspended the search after just 3 days after finding no evidence. According to them, the weather made it difficult and affected the search. They believe Nancy drowned that day, and because there's no sense of any urgency to continue looking for her, this forced Nancy's family to hire an independent search and rescue team called Black Wolf Helicopters. They've been the only ones to extensively search the lake and surrounding areas for any clues as to what may have happened to Nancy. They've searched 95% of Lake Audit using helicopters, boat teams, and divers, but Nancy is still missing, and because not really anyone in the group is coming forward to talk with police, they stated that it should now be considered a criminal investigation. The woman's identity, who was last seen with Nancy, has not been released to the public that I can find, but according to Nancy's family, they know who she is, and they've even tried reaching out to her multiple times for some answers. Yet that woman has refused to speak with them. And what's also strange is that this woman reportedly told Guatemalan officials that Nancy drowned that day, but that witness statement is nowhere in the official police report. So at this point, with no one coming forward and suspicious witnesses with key information that's being withheld, nobody knows what to think. The FBI is now investigating Nancy's disappearance, and her family has since hired a lawyer in Guatemala to investigate whether or not she actually drowned. Unfortunately, Black Wolf Helicopters have since had to suspend their search, but they're demanding that someone in the group come forward to at least tell them where Nancy went into the lake, because it would be incredibly helpful to at least have a starting point. This situation is an absolute nightmare. I've attached a GoFundMe created for Nancy's family to help them continue funding the search, because as of right now, most of the search and rescue operations have been primarily funded by them, which is not fair at all. Any funds raised will go towards the search as well as travel expenses for the family, as they're wanting to be in Guatemala as much as possible. It's now been 3 weeks since Nancy went missing. It's time to find her. There have been a lot of updates in the case of Nancy Ng, a woman who went missing during a yoga retreat to Guatemala last month, so let's talk about it. But be warned, these details will make your blood boil. If you need a full breakdown of the case, I posted an in-depth video about it last week, which you can go back and watch if you need to. The witness who was the last person to see Nancy alive has officially been publicly named. Her name is Christina Blasek, and she's a San Bernardino County public defender. Christina was on the same yoga retreat as Nancy, who disappeared on October 19th while kayaking on Lake Audit. It's now been 4 weeks since Nancy went missing, and Christina is only now speaking out for the first time through her attorney, Christopher Gardner. Nancy was last seen on video in her kayak on the lake, which was a little after 11 a.m. on the day she went missing. According to Christina, all 10 of the tourists went out with no safety training or life jackets, and once on the lake, they kind of all just went their separate ways. The water was reportedly becoming rough, so Christina started to head back to shore when she crossed paths with Nancy, who said she wanted to go swimming. According to Christina, she warned Nancy not to because the water was pretty rough and there was a good current, but Nancy reportedly jumped off her kayak anyway. Christina then says that she retrieved Nancy's kayak as it floated away, but she lost her grip. And after she got it for the second time, she turned around and Nancy was nowhere to be found. Christina then says that she immediately started screaming Nancy's name and screamed as much as she could, but she said that the water was pitch black and that she couldn't see anything, so she ultimately went back to shore for help. After she got to shore, she was greeted by the organizer of the retreat/yoga instructor, who has also since been publicly named. His name is Eddie Ramada, and according to both of them, once the distressed Christina got back to shore, he shielded her from onlookers and quickly rushed back to the hotel where all 10 of the tourists were staying. Christina allegedly told Guatemalan authorities what she saw, and they apparently told her that there was nothing that could be done and that Lake Audit is known for having people drown in it. This, of course, is everything that Christina told her attorney, who then released the statement. Nancy was then reported missing after hotel staff could not locate her. According to Lee Beal, the owner of the kayak rental company, the group was not scheduled to leave the next morning, but as we all know, within 12 hours of Nancy's disappearance, all 9 of the other tourists quickly checked out of the hotel without saying a word or talking to authorities, and they also did not pay for their excursion. But this is where things start to not really add up. After Nancy's family received a phone call from Eddie stating that she disappeared, they reached out to Christina, who again was the last person to see her alive, to see if she would talk to them and to help authorities locate Nancy. But Christina was silent. In fact, Nancy's family reached out to her multiple times, but she refused to say a word to them. Eddie reportedly told Nancy's family that Christina was too traumatized by the incident to speak with them. So they patiently waited for the police report, as that's all they could really do. And when they got it 5 days later, strangely enough, Christina's witness statement was nowhere in the official police report. There was actually not even one record of a single interview with Christina. Nancy's family and many others, including myself, are wondering why it took Christina so long to speak up and tell her side of what happened. Nancy's family has been begging her for information since since the beginning, but for some reason it took her 4 weeks and getting an attorney to release any information. And according to the family, this is the first time that they're even hearing of this story. Nancy's family has since had to hire an independent search and rescue team called Black Wolf Helicopters, who have been the only ones to extensively search Lake Atitlan and the surrounding areas, as Guatemalan authorities called off the search after just 3 days. According to Chris Sharp of Black Wolf Helicopters, they've already searched roughly 95% of the lake and have also searched by land and air. However, since no one came forward and told authorities where Nancy even went into the lake, it's made finding her extremely hard and has severely hindered the investigation. According to Chris, Christina's statement about the water being pitch black is extremely valuable and would have been useful at the beginning of the investigation. They could have focused their search on the deepest part of the lake where the water is opaque, based on her description of the color change. But of course, this information only recently came to light 4 weeks later. Black Wolf Helicopters is hoping to bring in a sonar expert with this information to investigate deeper than 5 feet into the water. With the little information that witnesses are willing to give, time is of the essence to find Nancy. The fact that the only witness who last saw Nancy alive took 4 weeks to even just come forward is so bizarre to me. And it's just not fair to the family to have the only person who knows something just willingly not speak up when they need answers. I'd like to remind everyone of the GoFundMe in my bio for the family to help continue funding the search for Nancy. At this point, her family is questioning everything, and they just want to bring Nancy home, as it's now been a month since she was last seen.